I always thought my family was normal. We smiled in pictures, ate dinner together, and my mom always told me to be a good girl. From the outside, our house looked happy, like the kind of home you'd see in a storybook. But inside, I lived in a nightmare. My dad was supposed to love and protect me, but instead, he did things to me that I didn't understand. Things that made me feel sick and dirty. He told me it was our little secret that if I told anyone, I would be the one in trouble. I was too young to know better, too scared to fight back. At first, I tried to believe that maybe this was normal. Maybe all little girls went through this, and I was just being dramatic. But deep down, something felt wrong. I could never explain it, but whenever my dad touched me, my heart would race, and I would feel like running away. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to tell someone. I wanted my mom to notice. But she never did. She was always too busy, too distracted. Some nights, she didn't even come home until late. She never asked why I was afraid of the dark. She never asked why I didn't want to be alone with him. I started keeping to myself, afraid that if I spoke too much, I might slip up and tell someone the secret. I stopped playing with other kids at school. I barely ate. My teachers noticed, but every time they asked if I was okay, I forced a smile and nodded. If I told the truth, what if my dad found out? What if he got mad? One night, I sat at the dinner table, quietly picking at my food while my dad talked about his job. My mom barely looked up from her phone. I wanted to scream, to tell her to put her phone down and look at me. Maybe then, she would know that something was wrong. Instead, she just sighed and stood up. "I have to go out," she said, grabbing her coat. My dad didn't even ask where she was going. He just nodded and kept eating. My heart sank.
My mom was leaving again.
She had been leaving a lot lately. At first, I thought she was just working late, but sometimes she would come home wearing perfume that smelled different. Her lipstick would be smudged, and there was a glow on her face that I never saw when she was around my dad. I didn't understand it at first, but deep down something felt wrong. Then, one night, everything changed. I had a bad dream and woke up thirsty. I walked down the hallway to get water, but when I passed my parents' bedroom, I realized my mom wasn't home again. The clock said 11:47 p.m. I stood in the dark, gripping my cup, wondering where she was. My dad was snoring in bed, completely unaware I was awake. That's when I heard the front door open. I ran back to my room and peeked through the door. My mom stepped inside, quietly closing the door behind her. But she wasn't alone. She was with another man. I gasped, my heart pounding so loudly, I thought they would hear me. The man whispered something, and my mom laughed softly, a laugh I hadn't heard in a long time, a laugh she never gave to my dad. I watched as she gently placed her hand on his chest, smiling up at him. He leaned in and kissed her cheek. It felt like I was in a dream. I squeezed my eyes shut. I didn't want to believe what I had just seen. My dad was hurting me, and now my mom was betraying him. I felt like I was drowning in a house full of secrets. I turned away from the door, my mind racing. Should I tell my dad? Should I pretend I never saw anything? But then a terrible thought hit me. What if my mom knew? What if she knew what my dad was doing to me and just didn't care? Maybe she was too busy with her own secret life to notice mine. I crawled back into bed, curling into a ball under the blankets. My chest ached, and tears slid down my face. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry out for someone to help me. But I knew no one would. Because in this house, secrets were the only thing we had. I woke up the next morning with a heavy feeling in my chest. The memory of last night still burned in my mind. My mom had been with another man. My dad had done things to me that I couldn't even say out loud. I was stuck in the middle of their secrets, drowning in silence. At breakfast, I sat across from my dad, pushing my cereal around with my spoon. He acted normal, like nothing was wrong, like he wasn't a monster. My mom walked in, her hair still damp from the shower, looking fresh and happy. She kissed my dad's cheek, and I wanted to scream. "You didn't come home early last night," my dad said, sipping his coffee. My mom smiled. "I told you I had to work late." I clenched my fists under the table. She was lying straight to his face, and he believed her. Or maybe he just didn't care. School was no better. The other kids laughed and played, but I felt like I didn't belong. My teacher, Mrs. Hayes, gave me a worried look. "Are you okay, sweetie? You seem tired." I nodded quickly. "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. I was breaking. But who could I tell? My mom? She had her secret. My teacher? Would she even believe me? Would she call my parents? Would that make things worse? So I kept quiet. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. Then I heard the floor creak. My heart stopped. A step. Coming closer. The door opened slowly, and I squeezed my eyes shut. Maybe if I pretended to be asleep, he would go away. I felt the bed sink. His heavy breath filled the room. A hand on my shoulder. "You know Daddy loves you, right?" His voice whispered in the dark. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then, just as suddenly as he came, he left. My body shook so hard I thought my bones would break. I buried my face in the pillow and cried until my throat hurt. The next day, I made a decision. I had to get out. I had to tell someone.
But how?
And who would believe me? I was living in a house filled with secrets, drowning in fear, and pretending everything was okay. But I wasn't okay. And I knew that if I didn't do something soon, I might never be. I started watching my mom more closely. I noticed the way she checked her phone when she thought no one was looking, the way she left the house in a rush, her perfume still fresh in the air. She had her own secret life, one that had nothing to do with me. And my dad, he was a monster in disguise, smiling in front of others, but terrifying when we were alone. One afternoon, I sat on my bed, holding my stuffed bear, the only thing in this house that made me feel safe. I thought about telling my mom the truth. Maybe if she knew what Dad was doing, she would leave him. Maybe she would save me. But another voice in my head whispered, "What if she already knows? What if she doesn't care?" I couldn't risk it. Then one day, something happened that changed everything. I was at school, sitting in the corner of the playground, watching the other kids laugh and run. I felt like I didn't belong. I was too different, too broken. That's when I heard someone call my name. "Hey, are you okay?" It was Mrs. Hayes, my teacher. She crouched down in front of me, her eyes filled with kindness. "You've been quiet lately. Something's wrong. You can tell me. I promise I'll listen." For the first time in forever, I felt like someone saw me. Someone cared. My heart pounded as I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Fear held me back. What if she didn't believe me? What if my dad found out? Tears burned in my eyes. I looked down, trying to swallow my pain. "I can't," I whispered. Mrs. Hayes didn't push me. She just placed her hand on mine. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Mrs. Hayes' words repeating in my head. "You don't have to go through this alone." The next morning, I made my decision. I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed help. At school, during lunchtime, I walked up to Mrs. Hayes' desk. My hands were shaking. My heart felt like it was going to explode. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, sweetie, what's up?" I took a deep breath, and then, in a voice so small I barely recognized it, I whispered, "I need to tell you something." And I did. I told her everything. About the nights filled with fear. About my dad. About my mom's secrets. My voice cracked, and tears spilled down my face, but I kept talking. I couldn't stop. It all came rushing out like a dam breaking. Mrs. Hayes' face changed. The kindness in her eyes turned into something else. Anger. Not at me, but at what I had been through. She didn't say much. Just reached for the phone on her desk and told me I was safe now. That was the moment everything changed. Police came. They asked me questions gently, but seriously. I was scared, but I answered. They took me away from the house that had been my prison for so long. My dad was arrested. My mom, she cried. She swore she didn't know. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe she wasn't. But it didn't matter anymore. I was free. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. The road ahead was still scary. I had wounds that would take a long time to heal. But I wasn't alone anymore. And that made all the difference. Looking back, I've learned so much. I learned that silence is the enemy of the truth. That fear only grows stronger when you feed it. But most of all, I learned that no matter how trapped you feel, there is always a way out. It might not be easy. It might take time. But some people will listen and help. I was once a prisoner of my past, but now I am free. And if anyone out there is going through what I went through, I want them to know, you are not alone and you can break free too.